This target population presentation will be on incarcerated youth. First, we'll be discussing how this group is defined, which is youth in corrections today within the United States. We will also go into the prevalence of related issues on development and learning, along with discussing the roles of school social workers, teachers, and other staff. The U.S. Department of Education gives a brief overview of this population, which goes into just about how many youth are in a facility on any day, the average cost per year for one youth, the percentage of youth with a diagnosed learning disability, and that stands for the juvenile justice facilities that have reported that they received special educations during their time spent there, and the percent of rearrests for youth released from juvenile justice facilities. Another interesting fact that I found that was reported by Corman and Brand states that approximately 60% of students going to school in juvenile detention facilities will have to re-enroll in school once they are released. A lot of the information that was found for this presentation was from Education Week, who did a large spread on teaching vulnerable students, which highlighted students that were in correctional facilities. And this quote kind of highlighted the challenges. It goes, quote, "Here is your challenge as a teacher. Come up with a lesson plan that requires minimal materials. Ask students to use nothing sharper than a crayon. Students cannot take any work home and have no access to outside resources like the internet. By the way, a third or more of your students will have special education needs, and all of your students have experienced trauma. Okay, go." End quote. Now we will go into the prevalence and impact of related issues on development and learning. So here we have some information on providing education within juvenile detention facilities, such as who is in charge when it comes to this. Also, we have some study results that were done by the Federal Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And these results show the states that have who is in charge for them. So whether that is state or district education agencies, a nationally recognized group, or private providers, education and corrections agencies that share the task and responsibilities of teaching behind bars. This here is a really cool visual of the breakdown in the United States of time spent in hours for hours of instruction in a week for juvenile justice facilities. It was found that the average hours was 26.3, and also take a look at the bigger states such as Florida and California, and seeing how those hours differ from the other states. So this data here is a kind of a continuation of what we were seeing on the map in the previous slide, and this looks at the juvenile justice facility education programs in the 2013-14 year to provide data for 594 of the 633 programs. So we see here that some schools have as little as 1 to 2 hours, which was that red zone, and the bigger states like Florida and California, where we saw that. Here we see how education in juvenile justice systems compares to traditional high schools, and here it is focused on math. So as you can see, all the juvenile justice percentages are lower in every single category, including the access to credit recovery programs, and pass rates for courses such as Algebra 1. Here we have some issues on development and learning for these youth, which goes into kind of trauma. With NASW, they support the fact that children and youth are developmentally different from adults and must be treated appropriately. And NASW is National Association of Social Workers. And we'll also go into the core needs for incarcerated youth in more detail as well. What is needed for these youth? There are a few points that I want to highlight. Although academics is highly important, so is the ability to make smart judgments and have self-control within different environments, to also increase stress tolerance to prevent reoccurring negative patterns. Also, looking at following and checking up with them after they're sent back to their communities. This is really something a school social worker could have the role of doing and focused on by communicating and preparing for the youth to have a transition back and make that a smooth transition for them into their school. Next, many of these youth have not had a structured, stable, predictable environment. So even though it is kind of like a lockup center, jail, that doesn't mean that there can't be a higher level of growth and self-identification for motivation towards their future. And then lastly, it's important not to stereotype these youth as dumb or stupid just because they are locked up, or categorize them as criminals. This period of time can be a great opportunity to provide them with information on different options for their life with education, not just the life that they think they're going to follow. The role of the school social worker. Here are some views that NASW opposes and supports. So the social work role here has to do a lot with advocacy and becoming educated on issues. So preparation for students for lifetime success. By being incarcerated, the need for credit recovery opportunities is higher, yet less than half of juvenile justice facilities have access to credit recovery programs. So needed data for youth that are processed as adults. There isn't any expectation for adult prison systems to collect or report education data. So this really leaves a lot of concern regarding those children who are being tried as adults and not really knowing their entitlement to receiving a full education. And lastly, so the Every Student Succeeds Act. This will be available to look at into more detail in the resources section, but this is based on states who accept Title I federal money, and the juvenile justice facilities have to follow specific laws. So an example of this is ensuring that credits that students are earning while in juvenile justice facilities can be transferred once returning to their school district. Within the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention 2009 article, the NASW has a policy statement and provides different points of support through following through with specific actions, such as like hiring social workers, and they kind of highlighted social workers who have skills in intake, interviewing, case management, counseling, and cross-cultural competency to meet the needs of youth and their families. With cross-disciplinary services, this kind of includes communication on a youth, family, and systems level, and access to resources for youth, along with continuum of care to follow-up services. The role of teachers and other staff. Here are some important points of information that link to teachers and other staff. Although this information can all be a little disheartening, there are schools within prison systems, such as the Wyoming Girls School and they're aiming to improve youth correctional facilities education. And so here, what's visualized is kind of like a strengths-based method that is being used within their program. So this continues to be a great example of how using evidence-based practice is really important. And with this program, within the last 5 years, all the staff and teachers have been trained on trauma-informed care and project-based and blending learning. So what's visualized here is the students' lockers, and they got really creative with creating kind of like tokens that stand for the different trauma and challenges that they're working on overcoming. Here are some helpful resources, and the next slide will provide the references for the sources that were used within this presentation. Thank you.